Hi everyone, you have to excuse me, I'm kind of losing my voice. I think it's been 10 talks in the last 2 weeks and kind of getting quieter and quieter each one. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about my involvement with emergency. Over the last few weeks I've been talking quite a lot about the film I made about going back to Afghanistan and talking about my photography, but tonight's a good opportunity to talk about really the reason why I was doing these pictures and the reason why the film got made, and that is because of my connection with emergency and my admiration for it as an NGO. To go back a little bit, I used to be a fashion photographer and a music photographer. Had a very glamorous life that I stupidly gave up to try and do more what I thought was important photography. I have to say, sometimes when you're lying in a ditch in Sudan and people are shooting in every direction, you kind of wonder why he decided to give up fashion photography in Miami. But anyway, and really, when I started out, I wanted to use my photography as a tool, as a way of telling stories about those people who live in the same world with us, but who have a completely different experience of it. People that we share the planet with, but who don't get the opportunities that we get. Those really without voices. And I wanted to use my photography as a way to give voice to those people. When I started, I worked for some of the bigger agencies, like the UNHCR, the International Organization of Migration, and I have to say, often I got quite frustrated with the politics and the amount of money that was spent in the hierarchy of the charities rather than actually what was getting through to the people on the ground. I remember doing a story for I won't mention the name, but a very big charity based in Geneva that begins with a U, and and it was a story about fishing points, which is a kind of obscure thing, but it was basically it was about these setting up fish farms for people in Angola, and they wanted me to go into Angola and photograph these places that they'd built, where they were getting villagers to build ponds where they could keep fish, and so keep a sort of sustainable source of protein for the people. And so I started off with a meeting in Geneva, and you sit in a boardroom and you have a very fancy presentation, and lots of people from various governments who are donating money to that charity were there, and everyone sits there and has glasses of wine and discusses how amazing this project's going to be, and they show sort of pictures of how they imagine it to be. And then I would go to Angola, to Luanda, and there you have a kind of the next level down, but again, lovely offices in Luanda, and people talking about these fishing points and how fantastic they are and the great work that they're doing. And again, then you go out for a nice meal, and you talk to most of the people in that agency and they've never actually left the capital. And then you go to a regional office in a place maybe like Luau, and then when you're there, again you're with a regional officer and they're talking about these fishing points, but they haven't actually visited them. And finally you work your way down and you find a fishing point. And I remember the first one I went to, which was just a kind of hole dug in the stream, and I asked the local people where the fish were, and they said, well, we ate them all because we were hungry. And so it hadn't actually been effective, but it was a really good example of how much money gets spent in these big organisations and actually how little money really reaches the people in need at the end. So I put more and more effort into finding NGOs and charities that really I saw in the field that were much more effective. One of the charities was Médecins Sans Frontières. I worked with MAG, which is a demining charity. And one of the other charities that I heard a lot about and found out more about was Emergency. And so I resolved that I wanted to do something to help raise their profile in this country, because at the time, really nobody had ever heard of them over here. I also had a slightly ulterior motive in that my experience in the field was always Italian NGOs cook the best food. I normally found some way of sneaking wine into whatever country they were in. They had their priorities right. So I got in contact with Emergency here in the UK probably about 4 years ago, and said to them, you know, I'd love to use my photography to try and tell some of their stories. So we discussed the possibilities, and I decided I wanted to do a couple of projects. The first of which would be the fantastic heart centre in Sudan, So you have to excuse me sipping on the beer, but it's my doctor said I have to take it for my throat. I would not drink it otherwise. So the first place I decided to go over many meetings in London, which always seem to be based around pizza. And I set off to Khartoum to go and document the Salam Heart Centre there, which is, I suppose, really the key project of Gino Strada's work in Africa to do with the many heart diseases throughout the country, or throughout the continent. But before I went there, I stopped off in Nigeria to go and actually see the assessment process and see the need. And immediately it became apparent by the hundreds and hundreds of people that were coming to this one assessment. And I think from those hundreds, it was only going to be maybe 14 people that would have the opportunity to go to the heart centre. And you could imagine in every country, in Kenya, in Somalia, Rwanda, every country has the same problems with heart disease, and the one centre run by emergency. So immediately I was struck by the importance of the work they did there. I had the great opportunity then to go and see the work that was done. This was a young boy who was just waiting for his surgery. Nervously, he'd never left his village, so you can't even imagine the kind of shock for him to suddenly be in this incredible hospital. And I have to say, it is an incredible hospital. I've had the misfortune to spend most of the last 2 years in hospitals, and I would say that probably the Salam Centre in Khartoum is cleaner and more beautiful and effective than any hospital I've ever been to. It's a really amazing, amazing place. So it was there that I got to meet a lot of surgeons, including Gino Strada. I have to say that I've known about Gino for quite a few years. He was somebody that I kind of really looked up to in the world of NGOs and charities. And I remember actually the first time I met him, he invited me around for a bite to eat. And I sent several emails to my girlfriend about what shirt should I wear. And I go, what kind of date are you going on? And of course when I met him, he was just there with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth and mumbling away. He's a fantastic man, and so I got to see the heart surgery up close, which I must admit the first time I saw it, actually as I took this picture, as you can see it sort of taken from above, and I'd managed to kind of get a pile of boxes and things at one end of the surgery, and I was a little bit nervous about getting in the way of Gino and the other surgeon, and actually as I took this picture I almost toppled over into the patient. So it could have been kind of a pretty horrible moment, but it was fantastic. And I remember watching them work, and I don't know if anyone's had the opportunity to see heart surgery, or surgery of any sort, but heart surgery especially. It's really like watching somebody who's a combination of being a tailor, a scientist. It's just so many skills come together.